How do you follow the biggest album of your career? In 1987, Whitesnake had conquered the world. Here I Go Again, Is This Love, and Still the Night turned David Coverdale into an MTV superstar. The album sold millions, packed arenas, and transformed Whitesnake from a successful hard rock band into one of the biggest acts on the planet. But success creates its own pressure. Every record company wanted another blockbuster, MTV wanted more videos, fans wanted another. 1987. And David Coverdale had to somehow top an album that many people considered impossible to beat. Instead, the road to Slip of the Tongue became another Whitesnake saga filled with lineup drama, injuries, producer changes, leaked songs, lawsuits, and one of the most technically gifted guitarists who has ever lived. This is the story of how Whitesnake made Slip of the Tongue. When the massive 1987 tour ended, Whitesnake looked unstoppable. Unfortunately, appearances were deceiving. The first major issue involved the guitar department. Adrian Vandenberg had officially replaced John Sykes after the 1987 sessions. Although he didn't play on that album, he had become David Coverdale's primary songwriting partner and was expected to shape the band's future. To strengthen the lineup, Coverdale also recruited former Dio guitarist Vivian Campbell. On paper, it sounded like a dream team. In reality, it wasn't. Vandenberg favored a bluesier, melodic approach that fit Coverdale's roots, while Campbell came from a heavier, more aggressive style developed during his years with Dio. Their personalities and musical philosophies never really clicked. The chemistry simply wasn't there. The tension became obvious during rehearsals for the new album, and before recording really got underway, Campbell was gone. He later said he never felt like a true member of Whitesnake and was frustrated by the lack of creative input. Coverdale, meanwhile, felt the partnership wasn't working. Ironically, that wouldn't be the last guitar problem, because an even bigger one was just around the corner. Rather than rushing back into the studio, Coverdale and Adrian Vandenberg escaped to Lake Tahoe. Away from the record company pressure and the distractions of touring, the two spent about a month writing the material that would become Slip of the Tongue. Some songs had their origins during the 1987 tour, while Coverdale also brought lyrical ideas he'd written earlier during his stay in Bora Bora. Once the songs were assembled, the band rehearsed them for several weeks. Everything seemed to be coming together. Then disaster struck. Vandenberg's long-standing wrist and hand problems became so severe that he couldn't perform the guitar parts in the studio. The injury eventually required surgery, leaving Whitesnake without the guitarist who had co-written almost the entire album. And if that weren't enough, another major change happened behind the mixing console. Originally, Coverdale wanted to reunite with producer Bruce Fairbairn, whose work with Bon Jovi and Aerosmith has made him one of rock's hottest producers. Scheduling conflicts prevented that from happening. Instead, producer Mike Klink, fresh off Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, handled the basic recording sessions, while veteran producer Keith Olsen oversaw overdubs, vocals, and keyboards. It was a different production team, a different atmosphere, and soon a very different guitarist. When Adrian Vandenberg unable to record, David Coverdale needed someone extraordinary. Not someone who could play the parts, someone who could elevate the album. That person was Steve Vai. By 1989, Vai had already built an incredible resume. He had worked with Frank Zappa, replaced Yngwie Malmsteen in Alcatraz, dazzled audiences with David Lee Roth, and was becoming known as perhaps the most technically gifted rock guitarist of his generation. Coverdale invited Vai to record the album. Vai accepted. Although Vandenberg had written nearly all the guitar parts, Steve Vai performed virtually every guitar track on the finished record, adding his own unmistakable style and dazzling technique. Even Vai later admitted the songs had already been written before he arrived, and his role was to bring them to life in the studio and on tour. His playing transformed the album. Some fans loved the virtuosic solos, others felt they were almost too flashy for Whitesnake's blues rock foundation. Even today, Slip of the Tongue remains one of the most divisive albums in Whitesnake's catalog because of Vai's unmistakable fingerprints. The guest list didn't stop there. Former Deep Purple and Black Sabbath singer Glenn Hughes contributed background vocals. Keyboard duties were shared by Don Airey, David Rosenthal, and Claude Gaudet, giving the album its enormous layered sound. Richard Page and Mr. and Tommy Funderburk also added backing vocals. The result was one of the most polished and expensive hard rock albums of the late 1980s. Unfortunately, before anyone could buy it, many people had already heard it. Album leaks feel like a modern problem, but Whitesnake experienced one decades before the internet. Just weeks before A Slip of the Tongue was scheduled for a release in 1989, a Santa Barbara radio station, KHTY Y97, somehow obtained an unauthorized copy. Rather than playing one song, they broadcast the entire album. Listeners were even encouraged to have their cassette recorders ready. For Geffen Records, it was a nightmare. Company president Eddie Rosenblatt happened to be in Santa Barbara that evening and personally heard the unauthorized broadcast. Within days, Geffen filed a federal lawsuit against the station and its owners, seeking damages of at least $500,000, while also obtaining a court order preventing further unauthorized broadcasts of Warner-related releases before their official release dates. Today, leaks happen with a mouse click. Back then, it was practically unheard of. The challenge wasn't simply releasing another album, it was recreating the magic of 1987. The first single was a newly recorded version of Fool for Your Loving, originally released in 1980. The remake featured a huge arena rock production, Steve Vai's unmistakable guitar work, and a glossy and MTV-ready music video. It became a respectable hit, but it wasn't another Here I Go Again. Then came The Deeper the Love, a power ballad designed to follow the formula that had made Is This Love such a massive success. Again, it performed well, but lightning didn't strike twice. Finally, Now You're Gone was released as another single with an elaborate video, yet also fell short of the enormous success Whitesnake had enjoyed just 2 years earlier. The album itself reached the top 10 in both the United States and the United Kingdom and eventually became another platinum success. But following an 8 times platinum phenomenon, like the self-titled 1987, was an impossible standard. Commercially, A Slip of the Tongue succeeded. Culturally, it never reached the same level. Whitesnake launched the massive Liquor and Poker Tour in support of the album. The lineup featured David Coverdale, Steve Vai, Adrian Vandenberg, who had recovered enough to perform live, Rudy Sarzo, Tommy Aldridge, and keyboardist Tommy Iyer. For the first time, Whitesnake had 2 superstar guitarists sharing the stage. Steve Vai brought dazzling solos that often include material like For the Love of God, while Vandenberg handled rhythm work and shared lead duties throughout the show. Concerts became huge visual spectacles, perfectly matching the larger-than-life style of late 80s arena rock. But behind the scenes, the music business was changing. Grunge was beginning to emerge, hair metal's dominance was fading, and David Coverdale was exhausted after years of non-stop recording and touring. The timing couldn't have been worse. By 1991, David Coverdale made a shocking decision. Whitesnake would go on hiatus. After spending nearly a decade building one of the biggest hard rock bands in the world, he simply needed a break. The era of MTV excess was ending and Coverdale wanted a fresh challenge. That challenge arrived in the form of one of rock's greatest guitarists, Jimmy Page. The legendary Led Zeppelin guitarist and David Coverdale joined forces for what would become the Coverdale-Page Project, a collaboration that generated enormous anticipation and one of the most talked about rock albums of the early 1990s. Was it a worthy successor to Whitesnake? Did Coverdale finally step out of Robert Plant's shadow? And how did one supergroup change the future of Whitesnake? That story we'll cover next time. In the meantime, check out the Deep Purple playlist, which should be appearing on your screen right now. I am covering everything from Deep Purple, adjacent bands, Rainbow, Whitesnake, Gillen, and all those. Right now, I'm in 1989 and going into the 90s, so going forward, I'll just be covering Deep Purple and Whitesnake because there's so much to cover. I haven't even touched on the next lineup of Deep Purple and all that. So, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.